Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Danny Gutierrez here on the Total Fight Mic. It is Friday, June 5th of the year, the dreaded year 2020. I know there's a lot going on out there with the death of George Floyd. I can't really say much that hasn't already been said. I know I look like crap. I just took Benadryl. Got introduced to some new kittens, so slightly allergic, but not overly allergic. But I guess the best thing for everybody is to be safe and to take care of your loved ones. I guess if you have a past beef with somebody, just drop it because life is short and you never know what's going to happen. So why don't we all try being a lot less angry? But that's all I have to say about that. And a moment of silence for George Floyd. So piggybacking off of that, last weekend we had the main event of Gilbert Burns versus Tyron Woodley, and this was a pretty interesting bout. Tyron Woodley was coming off of a 15-month layoff, and his last bout was a title loss to the now champion Kamaru Usman. And Tyron Woodley was actually originally slated to fight to rematch Robbie Lawler, the gentleman who he had originally taken the title from. And with the pandemic, a lot of things didn't unfold correctly, and there were a lot of injuries as well that were actually consequences to that fight not happening. But Tyron Woodley was actually slated to fight Leon Edwards from London, England. Unfortunately, that didn't take place, again, because of the quarantine and the pandemic and everything going on with COVID-19 and the coronavirus. Excuse me. So instead, Tyron Woodley opted to fight Gilbert Burns, who was a former lightweight, and he actually used to be undefeated. He actually entered the UFC undefeated, and he was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu ace. Excuse me. He had actually grappled against Kron Gracie twice. He dropped one, and then I believe he went on points or went to a stalemate with him in the second one. But I had not seen either grappling match. I'd only read about them. But at one point in time, Gilbert Burns was undefeated, and then he dropped three in the lightweight division, and then he moved up to welterweight. Now he's on a 5-fight winning streak, and he was going up against the former champion, Tyron Woodley, and he looked phenomenal. He looked really, really good. He looked phenomenal. He looked like the superior striker, even though he was physically the smaller man. And Tyron Woodley's one of those fighters that actually likes to put his heels at the edge of the octagon, so he likes it when you back him up so he can counter with his power, because he kind of likes you to overcommit so that he can meet you with his power. But unfortunately, what had happened was that he would try and do that, and he would wait just a little bit too much, and it looked like that was a detriment with his fight against Kamaru Usman, and that seemed to be a detriment here again against Gilbert Burns. Now, granted, Tyron Woodley, did throw a lot more volume in this fight, but when those shots landed throughout this fight, Gilbert Burns kind of ate those shots basically. And that being said, Gilbert Burns pretty much took on whatever Tyron Woodley gave to him, and more. He put out way more than Tyron Woodley gave to him. He was pushing him up against the cage. As soon as the first round opened up, it was about 30 seconds in where he landed an uppercut and a knee to the body that actually dropped Tyron Woodley. He out-wrestled Tyron Woodley, outstruck him. He kept utilizing his fakes and feints. He kept trying to open him up, and whatever area he'd open up, he would utilize his opportunities to capitalize on. So he would throw a lot of leg kicks. He would throw a lot of punches to the body. He was actually landing some pretty good lead left hooks as well against Tyron Woodley. But Tyron Woodley, again, kept looking for that right hand. He kept looking for that one shot. And a lot of people don't realize this because of the way he physically looks. Let me see if I can angle this better here. There we go. You can see Kratos in the back and Cloud Strife over there. He's 38 years old. Tyron Woodley is 38 years old. And not everybody's Yoel Romero. Yoel Romero's in his mid-40s, and he's been pretty phenomenal at the championship level. He's performed phenomenally at the championship level. But Tyron Woodley seems to be... I'm not ready to write him off just yet, but he seems to be coming to the end of his physical peak, his athletic peak. He won the title from Rob Lawler by knockout when he was 34, 35. So it's not middle-aged for everybody, but kind of middle-aged for an athlete, more especially combat athlete, combat sport athlete. Generally 32 to 34 is your athletic peak, because then your mid to late 30s you start to lose testosterone. But again, not everybody's Yoel Romero, who can fight and perform the way that a superhero can into their mid to late 40s. But 2 in a row, 10 rounds, 50 minutes, straight beatings, even though in his social media you could see that he's training really hard, and he was, crossed his T's and dotted his I's, but in the end it just didn't seem to be enough, and Gilbert Burns was the better man that night, and he was the better, well-rounded mixed martial artist. Now Gilbert Burns is the number one contender, and you have 3 guys who are actually arguably number one contenders at 170 pounds. So you got Gilbert Burns, you have Leon Edwards, which if he fought Kamaru Usman would be a rematch, even though Leon Edwards is on an 8-fight winning streak. And you have Jorge Masvidal, the holder of the BMF title. We'll see what happens, but the top of the welterweight division is actually looking pretty good. But with that in mind, let's piggyback on to UFC 250, which headlines the Women's Featherweight Championship. Amanda Nunes is going to be defending her title against Felicia Spencer, and Felicia Spencer's only loss has come to Chris Cyborg, and Amanda Nunes is the all-time women's GOAT. But other than that, this card is stacked with a whole bunch of bantamweights. I mean, if you're a hardcore and you're looking at this card, you're basically going, this is a low-key bantamweight tournament. Ever since Henry Cejudo announced his retirement at 125 and 135 pounds as the UFC champion, the UFC double champ, or Triple C, as he called himself. I mean, make no mistake, he is the king of cringe, but Henry Cejudo can fight, and he's talented. So Henry Cejudo can fight, and he's talented. But if he wants to retire, let him retire. But I mean, at the beginning of this pay-per-view card, you have Eddie Wineland, who is a long-time mixed martial arts veteran. He's actually a former WEC bantamweight champion. He fought Antonio Banuelos for that title. He's fought guys like Uriah Faber. He's been all over the place when it comes to his mixed martial arts career. He's had his ups, he's had his downs. He's a veteran. I know the term journeyman is kind of condescending of where somebody is at in their career, but Eddie Wineland has fought at Total Fight Challenge for Joe Guaitia at one point in time in Illinois, or was it Indiana? It was either Illinois or Indiana at the time, but he did fight for the Total Fight Challenge under Joe Guaitia way back in the day, in the regional circuit days, long time ago. Is taking on Sugar Sean O'Malley from Dana White's Contender Series. Now, he was off for 2 years because of that bogus USADA suspension, but he came back in flying colors in his last fight. He looked phenomenal when he knocked out his last opponent. He did it in the first round, and he did it like it was a walk in the park. But Eddie Wineland has a pretty interesting style. He likes to utilize fakes and feints a little bit. Likes to kind of stay in the pocket a little bit. He does have heavy hands. He's very tricky in the pocket. He's kind of a pop shot counter fighter, pop shot counter boxer. He does like to utilize leg kicks. High kicks not so much, but he likes to utilize leg kicks quite a bit. He also does have some pretty decent wrestling defense. His ground game is very, very underrated in my opinion, and a lot of people, in my opinion, actually underestimate his strength. He is a very strong bantamweight, and excuse me, guys. He has a very strong bantamweight, and he's going to be putting Sugar Sean O'Malley's skills to the test. But I do believe that Sugar Sean O'Malley's up to par. I really do believe that Sugar Sean O'Malley is willing to rise to the occasion, if you will. I mean, I do understand this was a very short comeback. Excuse me, guys. I do understand this is a very short comeback for Sugar Sean O'Malley, but excuse me. I had pizza earlier from Palermo's, and it's coming right up. Excuse me. But yeah, Sugar Sean O'Malley's actually going to be putting a lot of offensive pressure on Eddie Wineland. I think he's going to utilize a lot of fakes and feints himself and try and get Eddie Wineland to overcommit. And I think Sean O'Malley's actually going to keep him at bay with the straight punches, because Eddie Wineland does like to utilize those hooks, those looping lead hooks and overhands. And I think Sugar Sean O'Malley will get it done with his craftiness, his creativeness, his uniqueness, if you will. And next up, the next bantamweight fight on that card is Aljamain Sterling versus Corey Sandhagen. Now, with all due respect, I haven't really seen Corey Sandhagen fight, but I have seen Aljamain Sterling fight. Aljamain Sterling, he does train on the West Coast, or I'm sorry, he trains on the East Coast with guys like Ray Longo and Matt Serra, and guys like that. His wrestling pedigree is very strong. He's got a very strong wrestling base. For a little bit there, he was on a little bit of a skid, but he was able to come back and get on a little bit of a winning streak, and is in the running for one of the as to be one of the top bantamweights. Corey Sandhagen only has one loss, and that I don't even believe that was in the UFC. Real quick, let me see if I can open up his stats. Hold on 1 second. He was actually slated to fight Frankie Edgar, and that bout got canceled. So in the UFC rankings, he's number 4 in the bantamweight division. He lost once in the LFA to Jamal Emmers, and ever since then he's been on a 7-fight win streak. He fought Rafael Assunção on his last bout, and he's also fought Yuri Alcantara, who's another WEC vet, and he actually finished him at TKO punches in the second round, and that's pretty impressive because Yuri Alcantara's got well over 40 fights, just shy of 50. It's pretty good. He's also fought John Lineker, the very heavy-handed John Lineker, who's unfortunately not in the UFC anymore. But Rafael Assunção, who's also on this card, he will be taking on the very tough but the comeback of Cody Garbrandt, the second coming of Cody Garbrandt. So we will see what happens with the Rafael Assunção and Cody Garbrandt fight. But Corey Sandhagen has a pretty decent resume he's racked up coming up to this fight. Yeah, it'll be interesting. And then you also have, as I stated earlier, it's actually the co-main event. Rafael Assunção taking on Cody Garbrandt. Now, Rafael Assunção's fought guys like T.J. Dillashaw. He's also fought Uriah Faber. He's fought at featherweight. He's fought guys like Eric Koch. He's made a name for himself at bantamweight. As I said, he fought T.J. Dillashaw. He won the first bout, kind of controversially. He was very close. And then he lost and dropped the second bout. I believe that was at UFC 200. He's on a 2-fight losing streak right now. The first loss that he had was actually it was a rematch against Marlon Moraes. Marlon Moraes from the WSOF, that is now the Professional Fighters League, the PFL on ESPN. When he signed on to become a UFC fighter, his first bout was against Rafael Assunção. Marlon Moraes was. That was a very close bout. This bout was a rematch. Rafael Assunção got the better of the two in their first bout, but that's when Marlon Moraes was very much running hot and running through the bantamweight division, having knocked out Aljamain Sterling and finished Rafael Assunção, all within the first round. So, and he actually had a very close fight with John Dodson. So Marlon Moraes was actually coming pretty hot up until he got stopped by Henry Cejudo. You could say that the Jose Aldo bout kind of was kind of close. You could arguably give it to Jose Aldo, but you never know. But Cody Garbrandt, I mean, this is kind of like a third chance for him, in my opinion. He's got 3 losses, and at one point in time, he was undefeated. He was the undefeated UFC bantamweight champion. He fought T.J. Dillashaw, and in their first fight, Cody Garbrandt had actually knocked down T.J. Dillashaw and had him in trouble at the very end of the first round in the bell ring. So T.J. was arguably saved by the bell. But the championship mindset of T.J. Dillashaw and the coaching of Dwayne Bane Ludwig, and who knows, a little bit of EPO. Just kidding. Very much helped out T.J. Dillashaw to come back. He actually rallied back, and he actually finished Cody Garbrandt in the second round of their first fight. And then when they rematched, T.J. Dillashaw had actually knocked out and got the better of Cody Garbrandt in the pocket in the stand-up. He threw two looping overhands twice in a row against Cody Garbrandt, knocked him down, knocked him out. Then T.J. Dillashaw dropped down to 125 pounds, and then Henry Cejudo finished him off very quickly. I don't even believe that fight lasted longer than 15 seconds. And then T.J. Dillashaw tested positive on his USADA testing pool sample. So, with that being said, Cody Garbrandt's lost twice to T.J. Dillashaw, and then he actually dropped his third one to a very tough Pedro Munoz. That was very, very tough. That was a tough fight to watch if you're a Cody Garbrandt fan, because you know that he's way better than that. Under Coach Justin Buchholz, you saw a fighter in Cody Garbrandt that was able to get Dominick Cruz to overcommit when Dominick Cruz is the one that makes most of his opponents overcommit. And you saw that in his bouts with Uriah Faber. You saw that in his bouts with Brian Bowles way back in the WEC days, Ian McCall. You just saw when the Cody Garbrandt that fought Dominick Cruz hasn't shown up since that night. And it's unfortunate because he looked phenomenal, and he looked to be a promising champion, and he basically dethroned a very dominant champion in very dominating fashion. So for these two guys, this is very much a redemption bout, because Rafael Assunção coming off 2 losses in a row versus Cody Garbrandt's 3. It's gonna be very tough. It's gonna be a very tough case if Cody Garbrandt loses again, but it's a must win for both guys. Now on to the main event. Amanda Nunes versus Felicia Spencer. Now look, I mean, what hasn't been said about Amanda Nunes? At first, when she first came into the UFC, she was just your average bantamweight that was super tough and super durable, that was heavy-handed. Now, moving over to American Top Team in Florida, being trained with under guys like Juan Silverio and Mike Thomas Brown, and training with guys like Edson Barboza over there, Dustin Poirier, Jorge Masvidal, Joanna Jędrzejczyk. I believe she's still at American Top Team. She's just very much come into her own. She's won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 fights in a row. And within that span of 10 fights, she has become the UFC Bantamweight Champion, the UFC Featherweight Champion. She beat Miesha Tate. She's finished Holly Holm. She's finished Chris Cyborg and Ronda Rousey. I don't know how many more fingers I can go on, but still, she's in the short amount of time that she's made significant changes, she's arguably the GOAT. She's arguably the GOAT, and she's simultaneously holding two belts in two different weight classes at the same time. It's unheard of. It's unheard of, and she's defending them, which is very, very good. Good on you, Amanda Nunes. She's taking on a very tough Felicia Spencer. Now, Felicia Spencer has actually dropped her fight against Chris Cyborg. Excuse me. Now, that fight was a main event, but Felicia Spencer hung in there and weathered the storm, and it actually threw a Superman elbow on the forehead of Chris Cyborg and made it a dogfight. She made Chris Cyborg fight in a dogfight. She made Chris Cyborg look human, and she made Chris Cyborg, I won't say wither, but she made Chris Cyborg work. And it's pretty interesting because in Chris Cyborg's next bout, she fought Julia Budd and just blew Julia Budd out of the water. So you could say that Chris Cyborg was just the better mixed martial artist than Felicia Spencer, but Felicia Spencer wasn't very much afraid of the aura of Chris Cyborg. Now, you could argue that that was due to the loss of Amanda Nunes, but if that were the case, then she would have lost. So, with that in mind, Felicia Spencer is also the former Invicta Featherweight Champion, as well as having beaten another former Invicta Featherweight Champion in Megan Anderson, which was in the UFC. And dude, she made that fight look easy because Megan Anderson is super, super tough. She's a phenomenal striker that trains with guys like James Krause. And she's only had 3 fights in the UFC. She's 2-1. Her last bout, she finished in the first round. She's a phenomenal athlete. She's very tough. She's actually got a traditional karate background that she falls back on. She actually has some pretty decent boxing skills. Now, what she'll do is she'll try and push you up against the cage with her hands and try to utilize forward pressure so that you're counter-boxing, so that when you're counter-boxing, you're on your heels and you're overcommitting on your punches. Meanwhile, Felicia Spencer's going to duck underneath those that offense and try and utilize a single leg or a double leg, or even clinch and get her opponents up against the cage so that she could actually smother them and wear on them, so that eventually, as we saw in the Megan Anderson fight, she can sneak in some hooks and she can slowly wear down her opponents and then sneak into submission and finish them. All of her wins in the UFC are by finish, so this is going to be a pretty interesting bout between two high-level mixed martial artists. No idea what's going to happen in this fight. It'll be a pretty interesting bout. So, if you guys are going to go out, please be safe and be careful. Thank you guys so much for watching me on this episode of the Total Fight Mike, and I will see you guys in the sequel. Bye, everybody. Oh, and please remember to share, like, and subscribe.